Hello there, in this video I'm going to explain how to work out intervals for grade 5 theory. Are you ready? Let's go. First, you need to work out the interval number. To do this, just count up the letter names. Here we've got A, B. That's 2 letter names, so this is a second. In this case, we've got B, C, D, E, F, G, A. 7 letter names. This one is a seventh. If you have to count 8 letter names, we don't call it an eighth, we call it an octave. And if the letter name is the same but it's not an octave apart, we don't say it's a first. This is a unison. Rule number 1. Intervals built from the tonic of a major scale are always major or perfect. The perfect intervals are the unison, fourth, fifth and octave. The major intervals are the second, third, sixth and seventh. Here's an example. The lower note is C, so we're going to think of the C major scale. The top note is F. This is a fourth above C, so it's a perfect fourth because it's part of the C major scale. Here's another example. G to F is 7 letter names, so this is a seventh. Next we look at the G and we think about the G major scale. F sharp is part of the G major scale, so this one must be a major seventh. But what happens if the top note is not part of the major scale formed by the bottom note? Here's an example. D sharp isn't found in the scale of G major, so what do we do? First of all, we need to remember that in the G major scale, the interval of G to D natural is a perfect fifth. D sharp is 1 semitone or half step higher than that, which means that the interval is a little bit wider. When the interval is wider than the one you would find in the normal major scale, the interval is augmented. So this interval is an augmented fifth. Now this interval might look tricky, but actually it's just as easy as the last one we just did. First of all, we need to look at the lower note, which is A flat, and then we need to think of the A flat major scale. Here it is. You can see that the sixth note in the A flat major scale is F natural. You need to remember that. In the question, we have F sharp, not F natural. This means that the interval has been widened by a semitone or half step. So when a major interval is widened, it also becomes augmented. This is an augmented sixth. So now we know that when a perfect interval is widened by a semitone or half step, it becomes an augmented interval. What happens when the interval is narrowed by a semitone or half step? Well, it becomes diminished. For example, here is a perfect octave, but what happens if we change the top A to A flat? Because we've flattened the A, we've made the interval narrower by 1 semitone or half step, so it's not a perfect octave now, it's a diminished octave. A major interval which is increased by a semitone or half step is also augmented, but a major interval can be narrowed by 1 or 2 semitones, or in other words, by a half step or a whole step. When a major interval is narrowed by just 1 semitone or a half step, it becomes a minor interval. If it's narrowed by 2 semitones or a whole step, it becomes a diminished interval. Here's an interval of a third. We take the lower note B and think of the B major scale, which would be B, C sharp and then D sharp. In this one we've got D natural, so it's 1 semitone or half step narrower than the interval found in the major scale. So this one is a minor third. This time the D's been flattened, so it's now 2 semitones or a whole step narrower than the interval that you would find in the B major scale. So this one is a diminished third. And here are all the thirds that you could build from a bottom note B. B to D sharp is a major third because it's in the major scale. B to D natural is a minor third because it's one semitone narrower. B to D flat is a diminished third because it's two semitones narrower. And B to D double sharp is an augmented third because it's one semitone wider. You also need to know about intervals that are bigger than an octave like this one. You can count these in two different ways. You can count from the bottom D to the top A, which is 12 letter names, and call it a 12th, or you can just count from D to A, which is a 5th, and then use the word compound. So this one is a 12th or a compound 5th. And just as before, you need to qualify the interval using one of the words perfect, major, minor, augmented, or diminished. So this one is a perfect compound 5th or a perfect 12th. Here's a little exercise for you to practice what you've learnt. Pause the video and then come back and check whether you were right. Interval A is an augmented 4th. Interval B is a diminished 7th. C is a major 6th. D is a minor 3rd. And E is an augmented unison. Did you get them all right? So far, so good. But what if you can't make a major scale from the lower note? This could be because the lower note has a double flat or a double sharp on it, or it might be just that you're not very confident about making the major scale. Well, here's a trick you can use. The lower note G double sharp here is much too difficult to build a major scale from, so we're going to change each of the notes of the interval without actually changing the interval itself. We're going to lower each note by a semitone or half step. So the G double sharp will lower to G sharp, and the B will lower to B flat. It's very important that you keep the same letter names when you do this. Now our lower note is G sharp, but this is still not a nice note to build a major scale from. So we're going to do the same thing one more time. We're going to lower the G sharp to G natural and lower the B flat to B double flat. Remember, you must keep the letter names the same. Now that the lower note is G, it's easy to work out the interval. Think of the G major scale. G to B is a major third. G to B flat is a minor third. G to B double flat is a diminished third. So all of these intervals are diminished thirds. We've now covered everything you need to know about intervals, so here's a quick summary. First, work out the major scale from the lower note. If the top note is in that major scale, the interval must be perfect or major. If the interval is wider than the one found in the major scale, it must be augmented. If it's narrower than a perfect interval, it'll be diminished. If it's narrower than a major interval, it'll be minor. And if it's narrower than minor, it's diminished. An interval that's bigger than an octave is a compound interval, or you can just count all the letter names up to the highest note. If the lower note is too tricky to make a major scale from, then you can shift both notes up by the same amount, keeping the letter name the same, until you find a lower note that you can make a scale from more easily.